Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and welcome back to another video where I review your DNA and genealogy questions. As always, if you want to have a question that's featured in a future video, be sure to go to my subreddit and post that up. I've got a lot of questions in line, so it'll probably be a while before I get to any new ones, but if you're patient about it, you'll eventually get that question answered. Let's jump into it. So this one's straightforward. I'd like to hear your thought on the overall comparison of my DNA result, my mother and son. Okay, so we've got a lot of results typed out here. So we have my DNA, Ancestry, my heritage, family tree, sons and mother. Okay, straightforward. So starting with the mom, we see Scotland, Sweden and Denmark, Ireland, Norway, England and Northwestern Europe, Wales, Germanic Europe. So a big mix of that European mixture that we've seen so many times. So basically just that kind of typical Northwestern. For her MyHeritage, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, 48.9%, Scandinavian, 48.8%, Central Asian, 2.3%. So that Central Asian is kind of a interesting one, but I'm not quite sure. You know, it's not coming up in the others, and maybe that's a misread, especially because it's not coming up with the others. Her family tree DNA is all European, it seems. I see Western Europe. I'm guessing you forgot to put the percentage in there, but everything else makes sense with all of that still. Ireland, England, Wales, and Scotland, Scandinavia. Baltic is a little bit different, but when you're dealing with Baltic, you're still kind of dealing with about the same areas, you know, with like Denmark and Norway, you know, still a little bit out there. And, you know, a lot of companies do have their own readings of Baltic. So now your DNA, Sweden and Denmark, England and Northwestern Europe, Norway, Ireland, Scotland, Germanic Europe, Wales, Northern India. So the only thing really standing out here is that you're getting that 1% Northern India with your Ancestry DNA results. So, you know, is that coming from your mom and Ancestry just couldn't pick it up from her for some reason? Or is that coming from your dad? But your MyHeritage, we see Scandinavian, 81.3%, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, 13.7%, Ashkenazi Jewish, 2.1%. That's interesting. That's coming out of nowhere. 1% English, and then 1.9% South Asian. That's a very interesting mixture here. It's still kind of all making sense with the Northwestern European. With the Ashkenazi Jewish from MyHeritage, you know, I'm not seeing it with any of your other results, but if it is coming from anywhere, it seems to possibly be coming from your dad's side. On to the family tree DNA results. England, Wales, and Scotland, 92%. Scandinavia, 5%. Less than 2% Ireland. Less than 2% Baltic. Less than 1% Asia. Less than 1% Northern India. So your Northern India is coming through on each test in some way. South Asian in MyHeritage, but as Northern India in Ancestry and family tree. And then family tree is also calling part of that Asian. So my guess is that probably is coming from your dad's side. And if you get your dad to test, or if he has any siblings or even his parents are alive, getting them to test, you might be able to get a better idea of that Northern India. To me, that's what really stands out here for you, especially because there is a not super common, but it's not like rare. I'd say maybe it's more uncommon region that British people will have some sort of Indian ancestry just because from when India was part of the British rule. A great example of this is Richard Branson. I know that he has some Indian ancestry. They actually found it through a DNA test and then were able to figure out how that came into his family tree through researching in India. Now for your son, it seems like it's all European mixtures. The biggest difference I see between his and yours and your mom's is he is getting 2% Spain in Ancestry. He's getting North and West European in MyHeritage, a huge chunk. Although my guess is part of that chunk is some reading that he did inherit from you. And then for family tree DNA, the Magyar and West Slavic. But pretty much it seems you, your mom, and your son are a huge majority of just typical Northwestern European. Let's do the next one. So this person just says, thank you for the opportunity, and they post a lot of results. So just kind of clicking through, see if there's any specific questions. No questions. They just seem to have posted results. No comments. Yeah, I guess I'm a bit confused, but I guess let's look at the percentages. So we have 32.5% Iberian, 17.2% Sardinian, 5.5% Italian, 1% Finnish, 16.1% Mesoamerican and Andean, 1.4% Indigenous Amazonian, 9.6% West Asian, 9.1% North African, 4% Nigerian, and 3.6% Sierra Leonean. So big mix, but here we get the genetic groups, which is going to tell us the most information. So Central Puerto Rico and USA, and then Puerto Rico. So basically, this person is very likely of mostly Puerto Rican ancestry, and it certainly seems to fit with their DNA results. So let's see what some of the other results are. So here we have the ancestry. 34% Spain, 26% Portugal, so 60% Iberian in ancestry, 12% indigenous Puerto Rico, 4% Cameroon, Congo, Western Bantu peoples, 4% Basque, 4% Mali, 3% Sweden, Denmark, 3% North African, 2% European Jewish, 1% Senegal, 1% Northern Italy, Nigeria, Ivory Coast. Okay. So this is Ancestry. What was the first one we looked at? Is this 23andMe? MyHeritage. Yeah, this is MyHeritage. So it's basically you're Puerto Rican, it seems. But based on what we have here, there's really not much to tell. Without matches and a family tree and, more to work with, you can't really pull much out of it. And, the best that we can do is here in the genetic groups, it lists Puerto Rico and, Puerto Rico, US, Central Puerto Rico. So that's what's giving us the best idea. And the reason why it's so good is because genetic groups is based off of your genetic matches. And that's the best thing to use to figure out your ancestry. So not sure what your question was, if there was any sort of question, but I hope that was helpful. You're welcome for the opportunity. I only took a DNA test to see if I could get further back than my great-grandfather on my dad's side, but no luck so far on that side, as it is from Ireland. On my mother's side, I am finding more and more. What you may find interesting is that I have no Scandinavian, but here are my results. My question is, should I now do a Y-chromosome test or full genome test? And if so, which one do you recommend? So let's look at these results. So another very typical Northwestern European mixture. We have 49% Ireland, 25% England and Northwestern Europe, 22% Scotland, 4% Wales. Now, they mentioned, I thought, I have no Scandinavian, but here are the results. So I guess maybe did these update at all? Because I'm not seeing any Scandinavian here. Granted, it's been about a month since this person's posted. It takes me forever to get to these questions. So his question is, should he take a Y-chromosome test or a whole genome sequence test? And the answer really depends on what he's looking for. Now, he does mention that he is looking for his great-grandfather on his dad's side. So if he's talking about his father's father's father, which I'm assuming he is, then yes, a Y-chromosome test is going to be a really helpful tool for you. Now, it's kind of difficult to say exactly which will be the best for you. For me, I narrow it down to two main tests. It's either going to be a Y-chromosome test through family tree DNA, or it's going to be a whole genome sequence test through Nebula. Granted, there are other whole genome sequence testing sites, and I think there are other Y-chromosome testing sites, but those are the two that I'm familiar with and that have worked great for me, so I can trust in recommending them. In all honesty, I am probably leaning a bit more towards family tree DNA for this, just because family tree DNA's Y-chromosome tests are focused on genealogy. When you do it, it's giving you your matches, and it's presented in a way to really help you figure out how are you related to these people, if at all. Being that you've also tested through Ancestry, you can upload your Ancestry results to family tree DNA and then do the Y-DNA testing and then use those together. So basically you can see, is somebody matching you on the Y-chromosome test? And then if they are, you can also see, are they also matching you on the autosomal test? Because the difficulty with a Y-chromosome test is your matches could be a 1 or 2 genetic distance, but then their closest relation to you is hundreds of years ago, well beyond what you are able to trace to. So when you look at what y-DNA matches are also autosomal matches, that can give you a better hint of which ones are much more likely to actually be traceable. So if you get a y-DNA match with a 0 genetic distance and they're sharing like 120 centimorgans with you, that's a pretty good find, and you're going to want to dig further into that. Now, the benefit of doing whole genome testing is that you're getting it all. You're getting all of your autosomal, all your Y-chromosome DNA, all your mitochondrial regions. So if you are interested in looking into your purely paternal side while also looking into other sides at the same time, whole genome sequencing might be better for you. Now, with whole genome sequencing through Nebula, they are planning to integrate with family tree DNA in some sort of way. They've been saying it for years. They haven't done it yet, but it's still on the site. They keep updating that the time of rollout will be soon. They have done integration with Y-full, which has its own genetic matching. So if you do whole genome sequencing, you still will be able to do matching. It's just not going to be quite as straightforward as if you just do it through family tree DNA. But if you do the whole genome sequencing, then once it is up with family tree DNA, then hopefully you would be able to tap into their full Y chromosome matching database. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so for this question, it's basically they're confused about their DNA results. Specifically, they have 50% as Germanic Europe, so they're not quite sure where that's coming from. They think it's through their mom's side because the mom has a large amount too, but they want to make more sense of it. So we're going to try to do it, but the unfortunate thing is we don't know the family tree. And so without knowing the family tree, there's not much to really say, because what could be coming up as Germanic Europe, when you find it in your family tree, it might not be Germanic in the sense that you think of as like German. In fact, you might find that the family is actually from Eastern France. So it depends on your ancestry and how much you know of your family tree. So this might be a case of trying to read too much into the results, because if you haven't looked into your family tree, then it's like, what are you trying to gain out of this? Because I know a lot of people, they just want to kind of simple, I'm 50% this, 25% that, 20% that, 5% this. Okay, that's my ancestry. But unfortunately, there's just, at least nowadays with the technology we have, there's just no way to say that for certain. So these are just estimates. But looking at the results, Germanic Europe 50% like we expected, Scotland 22%, England and Northwestern Europe 11%, and they have a community connected to this in Southeast England. Then Eastern Europe and Russia 8%, Sweden and Denmark 6%, Ireland 2%, Norway 1%. And then connected to 3 genetic communities: Southern Ontario settlers, early Connecticut and New York settlers, and Southeast England. Like I said, really not much to pull out of this. In all honesty, everything seems to be a typical Northwestern European mixture, except for that 6% Eastern Europe and Russia. So my guess is that you probably have like a great grandparent of some sort who was Eastern European, Russian, Slavic, some sort of something like that. But otherwise, everything's kind of that typical mix that we've seen a lot in these videos: Germanic Europe, Scotland, England, Northwestern Europe, Sweden, Denmark, Ireland, Norway. It's like this repeating over and over and over. Anyone who's watched, all the other reviews I've done, this is like a real common thread. And the answer is it's the difficulty in reading this. Without knowing your family tree, what you know about it, it's going to be very, very difficult to really pull anything out of this other than what your DNA communities are already saying. You're probably connected to Southeast England in some sort of way. You're probably connected to early Connecticut and New York settlers. So if you trace your family tree, you'll probably find some sort of family living in early Connecticut and New York. Southern Ontario settlers. So you probably have family that were from Canada. I don't think you mentioned anything about Canada, but my guess is you probably either are in Canada or you have a lot of close relatives who live in Canada. But if you're really trying to understand the Germanic Europe, then trace your family tree, and that's going to give you the best understanding. So really any sort of part of your ancestry could represent this. And as I said, only doing your family tree will tell for sure. So here we have Native American or mulatto. Growing up, I was told that an ancestor had married an Indian and that I was 1/16 Native American. However, that's not what my DNA profile says. No Native American in it, but 4% from Mali, West Africa. I went through the lines and didn't find anyone who appeared to be Native American, but I did find an ancestor who is listed in several censuses as mulatto, along with his wife and kids. The next generation is listed as white. So my cousin Chuck insists that no, they were actually Native American and the census takers just listed them as mulatto because they weren't white. I'm not sure I buy that. Not to mention there's no trace of Native American in my DNA, and if I was 1/16th, it would surely show up, wouldn't it? My mom is convinced that her line couldn't possibly have the West African DNA in it, and it must be my dad's line. Nope, dad comes from a very old Mennonite family, and they kept immaculate records. Not to mention they didn't marry outside the community. But mom's family came to North America in the 17th century to Virginia and North Carolina. So how do I figure out whether the reported mulatto line is actually Native American or is it indeed West African? And then the OP also mentions further combing through censuses found ancestors up 3 more generations, 2 listed as mulatto, and the earliest is African and a freed slave. Well, I'm gonna say that I think you already know the answer. Cousin Chuck is wrong. The DNA and the paper trail are coming together and telling you that this is not Native American, that you have African ancestry. And especially now that you have multiple generations and that one was a freed slave, I think it's pretty accurate at this point that that's going to be certainly where you're getting this 4% Mali, West Africa. Now, some other things that you can do to further confirm what is pretty apparent to me. You can get other cousins from this same line to test. And technically, it might not even need to be your line. If you've already started to trace this line up multiple generations, the hope would be that you'd be able to find siblings of some of these ancestors of yours and then trace down their descendants to see if you can find anybody living. And even more, could you find any DNA matches who are descending from the same family, and are they getting any African ancestry? But just between the correlation of the 4% in your DNA as well as the paper trail, I mean, that's like such a great combination. That's what most genealogists are looking for. And, you know, Cousin Chuck can think all he wants that it's Native American, but that's not going to make it true. And at 4%, you're probably looking at like a 3rd great grandparent would be the most recent fully African ancestor, assuming that the family back in those generations, maybe there were people marrying where both of them had a mixture of African and European, which is what I always say when I say, you know, assuming it comes from one fully African ancestor. Well, it might not be coming from a fully African ancestor. You might have 2 different ancestors who are both half African. But it sounds like you're already on the path to what you need to do to figure this story out. And if you already have all this paper trail in multiple generations, I'm sure you're going to be able to find a lot of other documentation connected to this. And maybe you can even find out about this ancestor of yours who was enslaved and then freed. And one interesting place that you can actually look is even looking in newspapers, and you might be able to find stories just from that. It can be difficult, especially if your ancestors weren't really doing anything where they would show up in the newspapers. And I've used newspapers in my research to uncover all sorts of amazing stories. And if you check out this video right here, you'll actually get to see me uncover a really interesting story about a woman named Antoinette Lockowitz, who in the 1920s got into a big fight with her landlord, which eventually involved the Ku Klux Klan. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. And if you'd like to subscribe, be sure to click right about here. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.